It's really an honor to be here. My name is Gautam Raghavan, and as Norman said, I have the honor of serving in President Biden's senior staff as Director of the White House Office of Presidential Personnel. My team's job is to help the President find, recruit, and appoint the most diverse, passionate, talented folks to serve in the administration, from the cabinet to our U.S. ambassadors to agency heads to thousands of appointees to serve across the administration whose names you probably have never heard, but come to work every day fired up and passionate about serving the American people. On the campaign, on the transition, the President committed to building an administration that looks like America, and we've done that. While Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders make up 7% of the country, I'm proud to share with you that 17% of White House staff and 14% of agency staff are members of our community. You see that representation in the cabinet, in agency leaders. You saw it in some of my colleagues who spoke yesterday, Chris Lakai and Erica Moritsugu, and our former colleague, Vidita Gupta. You see it everywhere in our administration. It's something we're incredibly proud of. So I can tell you from firsthand experience that building truly diverse, inclusive teams is possible, but it is not easy. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And we know that we have a lot of work to do, and we see perhaps the greatest disparity in senior leadership roles. And it's a challenge that we deal with all the time, and we see that in corporate America. For example, while Asian Americans make up 12% of the workforce, AANHPIs only make up 1.5% of corporate officer positions. And we also know that representation is just the first step, right? Building teams and maintaining teams doesn't stop when you hire someone. It's also about making sure that we really think about retaining and growing talent. That means intentionality around workplace belonging and culturally competent mental health. So we're going to talk a little bit about this with this amazing panel. We're going to talk about what barriers, explicit or implicit, exist that contribute to the lack of AANHPIs in senior leadership roles. And we're going to talk about how we can ensure that our community is empowered and informed in a bias-free workplace, and we create a culture in which we all feel like we belong. So we've got a rock star panel of three amazing women here who have cracked into the C-suite. So I'm pleased to introduce them. First, Lisa Chang, Global Chief People Officer at the Coca-Cola Company. Please give a round of applause. Second, Dr. Diana Han, who's the Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer at Unilever. And last, April Ko, who's CEO of Spring Health. All right, so let's get started. I want to talk about representation first. Of all racial groups, we know, as we talked about, Asian Americans are the least likely to be promoted into management positions. A McKinsey study of more than 400 organizations revealed that Asian Americans account for 9% of senior VP roles, but just 5% of promotions from SVP to the C-suite. And of those promotions, Asian American women make up less than 1%. So I'd like for each of you, and we'll start with you, Lisa, to talk a little bit about your experience navigating corporate environments, both as an Asian American and as a woman. What was helpful for you in breaking through those barriers, which some people call the bamboo ceiling?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I think for me in particular, it has been important to have mentors, sponsors, and individuals that have invested in my own success and own development. So I think one of the things that I'm hopeful that we'll talk about today is the importance of extending your hand and helping others, but also in asking for help. So it's something that we don't do well as Asians. We don't like to admit that we need help or that we don't have all the answers. So I think, again, when you look at these statistics, what's concerning about it is there's not a lack of available talent. It's the exposure that the talent needs and the opportunities to be represented on the slates. And so what we try to do at Coca-Cola is create communities where our talent has an opportunity to connect, to seek mentorship, to have sponsorship of leaders that when we have discussions about succession and talent planning in the room, there's someone that can speak on the talent's behalf about their capabilities, their experiences, and the contributions that they can bring to the table. We know a lot of that happens in the boardroom and in the leadership rooms. And so having mentors and successors and people that will speak on your behalf is extremely important. So that's why we create these connections in these communities. We have business resource groups, we have sponsorship programs that allow our talent to find those individuals. But it takes effort on the part of the individual to reach out to those communities and create those opportunities for connections.
That's great. And I think the point you made about there's no lack of talent is an important one. Whenever someone says the people aren't there, I say you're just not looking hard enough, or you're not looking in the right places.
Or if they say you can't find it.
Exactly.
That's
right. Diana?
Good morning, everybody. Actually, very similar in terms of my own personal story, but also from a corporate standpoint, that I think the mentorship and importantly, the sponsorship, because mentorship alone is absolutely not enough. When there are talent forums, having someone who can advocate for you is really, really, really critically important. As far as, from a personal standpoint, I will say there are a few things that have helped me. The first of which is, to be honest, being incredibly open to nonlinear pathways of growth. It's pretty much been at every transition of my career. Quite candidly, I wasn't actually even seeking that next move. It's a combination of staying open to things that maybe seemed strange or very much nonlinear, and being open to that and being curious about that. I also think there's a bit of what my daughters would probably label as generationally as well as manifesting a bit of your destiny, but speaking out loud. Your general aspirations to people who inspire you. So it's that combination of having the aspirations, being open, networking so that you can have a chance to get advice from those who inspire, and a bit of that audacity, which sometimes culturally is not part of our Asian DNA, I think is also really important as well.
I love that. April?
Yeah, I'm just so impressed by both Lisa and Diana for climbing the corporate ladder and really penetrating through the bamboo ceiling. I have a little bit of a different story. I never climbed the corporate ladder, and I made myself the CEO by founding my own company. And I founded the company actually while still an undergrad at Yale, and so I really never have experienced that. Or never climbed or had to climb the corporate ladder. So my story is a little bit unique. So I started the company when I was still very young, in my last year of school. And Spring Health, for those of you who don't know, is a mental health company. We serve very large enterprises, and we give free access to high-quality mental health care for employees and their family members. And the bamboo ceiling that I encountered is not climbing the corporate ladder, but for me, it was really going out and having to raise capital, venture capital, and having to ultimately convince customers, Coca-Cola is a customer, for example, or KKR, of buying Spring Health. And ultimately, we've been successful. So we are about 1,000 employees, corporate. Almost 10,000 providers globally. I've raised over 300 million in venture capital. Our last valuation was 2.5 billion. And so, over the past 8 years, but over the past 8 years, I think for me, the bamboo ceiling has really been in struggling to get there and have those achievements. But I think when I reflect, on my story, the struggle that I went through was that when you're a founder or an entrepreneur, investors really want to see or invest in people that they can pattern match against previous successes, right? And when you think about successful entrepreneurs or founders, you don't really think about a young Asian female, right? Like, it's not really an archetype that is common. You probably can't name a single young female Asian entrepreneur. And so that really worked against me in the early days. Also, I was reflecting on this a little bit, but I'm Korean. I was born in Korea. I moved to the States when I was really young, but I grew up in a very Korean household. And I know there are a number of Koreans here in the room, but a very Korean household means a very Confucian household. And Confucianism is all about the patriarchy, and it's all about actually age. And so one of the things for me that I remember talking to my dad about very explicitly was, I can't shake this Confucian cultural heritage that I have when I'm interacting with people who are so much older than me, investors who are so much older than me, or employees who are so much older than me. And so that was one of the unique challenges that I faced. But I would say that I don't really know exactly how I didn't have an explicit strategy for overcoming these things. But what I do recall is in the early days, I did get some key Asian female investors. And I think just going back to your point around sponsorship, I think it's so important to find those who see themselves in you, I guess, who relate to your story, and strategically position them in a way in your career so that they can help you and help elevate you. And it was those first few Asian female investors who helped us gain the momentum that we needed to then go on to get some of the most iconic investors on our cap table.
Thank you. And thank you all for just sharing a little bit of your personal stories. I want to dig a little bit into the work that you do now and highlight that according to the latest results from the Inclusion at Work survey, 1 in 2 AAPI workers say that their race or ethnicity makes it harder to achieve career goals. Lisa, as Global Chief People Officer at one of the largest companies in the world, what trends are you seeing in your workforce with AAPIs in the workplace? And what do you think companies can do, like yours, to cultivate opportunities, environment where we feel like we belong and thrive, especially in this very challenging, complicated dynamic that we're in right now?
Yeah, I think the good news is there are a lot more young talent like April and others that are willing to challenge the stereotypes of what's existing in the past. I think when I was coming up through the corporate ranks, there were a lot of steps and ceilings along the way that hopefully as more and more Asians rise to roles of greater responsibility and leadership, those can be somewhat removed from a barrier standpoint. I think what we're also seeing is that the young talent are willing to do what it takes to navigate some of the challenges from before. I think one of the conversations that we were having earlier was just really around the shifting dynamics of even those of us that were children of immigrants. So my parents immigrated from Taiwan. I happened to be born in the States, but similar, there were a lot of immigrant tendencies to the family, the tiger parents, the whole, kind of that whole mentality. But I think, when I look back at some of the decisions I made along the way, I would say courage is an important component of that. So I am a med school flunky. I did not make the ladder to go to medical school despite my parents' strong urging and path that they created for me. And I remember very distinctly the moment that I called my parents from the university and said, look, I don't think medical school's for me. I really want to do something different. And my parents said, well, what is that? You want to be a lawyer? No. Do you want to be an engineer? No. And they're like, well, then what could you possibly want to be? Because there was only the holy trinity of doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I said, well, I'm not really sure, but I want to go into business. And I'd like to either study communications or English. And my dad said, well, you're not studying English because you already speak English. So I'm not going to pay for you to go to college to learn English. And I'm like, it's not that, Dad. But anyway, point being, I think you have to be courageous. You have to take those paths less traveled. You have to make sure that you put yourself in positions to get the opportunities that you want. And it does start with communication. I think you mentioned this. It's putting it out in the universe and letting people know that you have a strong interest and a strong capability to do things and that you want to be part of the opportunities that are there. And my career was the same. It was a very non-linear path. But I was always willing to learn and always willing to work hard and give what it takes. So I think that those things are still existent today. I think also today's young workers are much more purpose-driven. And I think that gives me hope as a company that is purpose-driven to find people that want to be part of that movement.
That's great. Well, thank you. April, you founded Spring Health, which I've learned provides mental health benefits to more than 10 million people by leveraging technology to improve the patient-provider relationship. As CEO, as the boss, which you made yourself, how does diversity and leadership and building belonging drive growth for your company?
So, I think it's quite simple, and I'm sure many of you are aware of these stats and these realities, but diverse teams perform better, right? So diverse leadership teams make 19% more revenue, in fact, and companies that self-identify as more diverse or inclusive are actually 35% more likely to outperform their peers. And so diverse teams, diversity is it helps businesses perform. And so when it comes to diverse leadership or feeling belonging, these things might feel kind of like soft topics that people might deprioritize, but the reality is you can't build high-performing teams, you can't build diverse teams without diverse leadership and without fostering a feeling of belonging for these underrepresented communities. Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. Diana, you hold a unique role at Unilever as Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer. You're responsible for, and I checked this because I couldn't believe it, for the well-being of 150,000 employees around the world. In your experience, not only as an executive, but also as a physician, how much does belonging impact mental health in the workplace, and how do you see the connection between the two, especially for our community?
Yeah, I think there's an ample body of literature that exists in the public domain with respect to the critical, not just correlations, but all the causative links as well around belonging and well-being broadly, and specifically also mental health, but obviously physical health plays into this as well. I think well documented and also very public, actually, in terms of some of the work that the Surgeon General has done around loneliness, isolation, and its impact when it comes to well-being. And so holistic well-being simply is better. And the evidence base is clear when people have that sense of belonging. And then obviously specifically within mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, or even more serious mental health issues that arise when people feel that they don't belong. I mean, it is an existential crisis when that sense of self is externally sort of under question or under threat at all times. And I think there's also ample literature as well that from a performance standpoint, that when we feel that we belong, that we are included, when we can bring actually our authentic selves to the workplace, performance also improves. So there's a well-being lens to this, and then there's a real business return with respect to performance because of the connection between health, well-being, and performance.
I think this is a good moment also to just acknowledge, companies often use employee resource groups, ERGs for short, to build community and spaces of belonging. Some of you in this room might be part of those, and I hope found that that's been helpful to you to feel safe and affirmed in your workplace. Lisa, what other strategies, in your view, are successful to help AANHPIs feel like they belong? What's needed to boost that sense of belonging, visibility, representation at all levels of leadership?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the ERG comment, because I think it is really important in organizations to have a place where people can go to convene with people that are like-minded. So whether it's an Asian, whether it's a new parent, whether it's, and this, I think, to Diana's point, is an important part of that community and sense of belonging. And so at Coca-Cola, we have several inclusion networks that allow us to bring people together with like-mindedness. And it's not just isolated to people that identify as Asian or Black or Hispanic or parents, but it's people who support and are allyship. And I think what's important about that is the notion of creating a community where you have a shared understanding, right? And I think understanding is important, education is important, and respect is important. And I think in this day and age, having all of those items as part of the ecosystem of inclusion is what drives that feeling of community. I have a safe place to go. I have people that are like me. I can do things together with them and feel not only validated and seen, but heard and enjoy that kinship. I think the other thing that we encourage people to do is to create communities within their own teams. And so we do a lot of celebration of different types of holidays or events or things to educate people on what is in our culture. Like Unilever, Coca-Cola is a global company. We are in over 200 countries. And so in the US, we have to work a little harder to help people understand the differences. But as a company, we manifest that way every single day in all the countries that we operate in. So I think I go back to that. I go back to the sponsorship piece. I go back to making sure that you find people that can relate to your stories and relate to the experiences you've had. My brief interaction story that kind of was a pivot point for me was when I went to college. I grew up in a very small town in Virginia where there were very few Asians, and I think that really left an impression on me about how much I didn't understand about my identity and how much I sort of underplayed that for the first part of my life. When I went to college and I found a community of Asian students that had like experiences, all of a sudden, I felt like I belonged and that I had been seen and that there were people that could identify with some of the things that I was dealing with. So I think that's incredibly important for organizations to not only create the spaces and the places, but the opportunity and the support to allow people to experience that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm certainly reassured and inspired by how much thoughtfulness has gone into thinking about workplace belonging and inclusion. I wonder how much of it also is driven by, we just went through a pandemic where so many people were experiencing a real sense of isolation and removal and worried about their own mental health. And April, I want to ask you, because you talk to companies every day about mental health, and how, in your view, are organizations rethinking it as a resource? And does it make business sense to cultivate and prioritize mental health along with belonging?
Absolutely. So what I can say is that the cost of mental health issues to the workplace are extreme. So even just talking about diversity aside, just the cost of mental health issues is very high. 1 in 4 people struggle with a mental health issue at some point in their life. 21% of your organizations right now are actively suffering with a diagnosable mental health condition. And unfortunately, most of the time, the people who are diagnosed or people who are suffering do not get the care that they need. And so what that means is that people are taking sick days because of their mental health issues. 50% of sick days are actually attributed to depression. People are turning over because of their mental health issues. Depression is actually the leading cause of disability, which means that your employees and your colleagues are leaving or taking disability leaves because of these mental health issues. Mental health issues drive 50 to 60% of a company's overall healthcare spend. And we all know that healthcare is one of the biggest line items and expenses for US employers. And so mental health issues are very costly, but when it comes to talking about diversity, you can't talk about diversity without talking about mental health. Because unfortunately, as Diane said, minorities are at greater risk for mental health issues. And I mean, it kind of makes intuitive sense if you're subject to microaggressions every single day at the office or in the workplace. I mean, it's built up over time, and it absolutely puts you at higher risk for these issues. And so something that is absolutely table stakes in today's world is employers need to give their employees access to fast access to high quality mental health care. And that's what we're seeing across the board, across all industries, across large employers. When I started the company 8 years ago, it was still people were still waking up to this reality, kind of figuring out what to do about this growing global mental health crisis. Employers were kind of giving up on their employee assistance programs. I don't know if you all know what EAPs are, but they were really starting to give up on these programs because the access into care was impossible. And so, over time, the understanding that employers needed to respond grew. And so now, what we've built is a solution that gives people same day, next day access to really high quality vetted providers, virtual and in person. And based on my own personal struggles with mental health and my struggle to find a culturally competent Korean, ideally, provider in my own journey, I've made we've been very deliberate about building a very diverse network so that people in underrepresented communities can access providers who look like them. So we have 3 times the number of BIPOC providers in our network than the traditional network. And so this has resonated with employers phenomenally. And so as I mentioned, we have some customers here, but we work with Target, we work with JP Morgan, we work with Microsoft, industries across the board. And there's kind of this revolution happening of waking up to the realities of mental health in the workplace. And ultimately, it makes business sense to invest in these things because for every dollar actually that companies invest in a solution like Spring Health, they get $4.40 back. half of which is actually healthcare savings, so healthcare or health plan savings, and then half of which is savings on turnover. So people who use Spring are less likely to turn over, and reduce sick days, reduce absenteeism, presenteeism, all of these things. So from a moral and ethical sense, from a diversity sense, and from a business sense, Spring Health and mental health care makes a lot of sense.
I absolutely agree.
Just add one
Yeah,
thing
please.
to that. I mean, I think one of the important aspects of what's happening with mental health now is sort of the normalization and socialization of talking about it. I think it's one of those things that for many, many years has been very taboo, and especially in the Asian culture. It's not something that we talk about. And so I think post-COVID, some of the other things, normalizing within organizations that it's okay to talk about the need for mental well-being and support and resources is incredibly important. So I wanted to just make that comment because I think, again, socially, as a culture, it's not something we talk about.
100%. And Korea has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and yet the access to care is direly bad. And even in my own experience, growing up Korean, this amount of stigma that remains today, unfortunately, against mental health issues in my community is depressing. And I remember when I was 9, I went to my mom and I said, I think I'm depressed. And she was doing her laundry and she was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, she didn't even I think that, and by the way, my mom is the best woman on the face of the planet, and I love her to death, and she's the best mom, but she just didn't have the vocabulary to even think or talk about these issues. And so I think that's an incredible point, Lisa. We as a community, as an Asian American community, we experience way more stigma around mental health issues even today, and we need to talk about that.
I see a lot of nodding heads in the room. I think every part of our community, we feel some sense of that stigma and that fear of opening up or asking for help, to your earlier point. So if I could just ask all of you if you have any thoughts, what can we do as a community to open up about mental health and to normalize, destigmatize the needs that every person has?
So I think I'll speak first from the corporate perspective, because this point about stigma is very real across the board, regardless of your heritage or how you identify. And so Unilever is a founding partner of a coalition of multinationals called the Global Business Collaboration, and we will be releasing in mid-June a global research report, and one of the key points as we took a look at a dozen or so countries, including countries where many of us are from in terms of our family origins, over half of people around the world in the workplace still very much feel that stigma. And so from a corporate standpoint, I think one key thing that companies can and must do is first and foremost enable a culture of psychological safety. So what is psychological safety? In some ways, there's a certain intuition around the juxtaposition of the two words, but in a nutshell, if you boil everything away, psych safety is about being able to speak up without fear of negative interpersonal consequence. There's a lot in each of those words of that definition. Maybe said differently, it's felt permission for candor and felt permission for authenticity. And I can tell you, Unilever has been on this journey to build a global culture of psych safety, and it's hard. It's really hard. I think level setting, that aspiration as a company, that desire to have that culture alive every day, so each and every one of our people can bring their authentic selves, can be candid, to work requires work. And one of the things I think that's really important is, like all things, no matter what business you are in, first and foremost, measure. What does actually the data say? There's, of course, plenty of data in the public domain. But again, each employer setting can be very, very different. And like Coca-Cola, we operate in many hundreds of countries around the world, lots of cultures and peoples in the mix and consideration. So literally having an assessment that measures, in this case, obviously we're talking about mental health, so that you know exactly what the truth is in your workforce, and then being able to then address in very tailored and customized ways. I think leadership makes a big difference. I think everyone here has probably heard this construct that everything starts with leaders in an organization, but I don't think we should assume that just because leaders are in leadership roles that they just roll out of bed every morning and have full awareness. There's a lot of nuance in these topics, and so level setting everyone, raising awareness, educating is really, really important because, you know, unconscious bias, lack of cultural sensitivity, even for well-intended individuals and stakeholders, is alive everywhere from a workplace standpoint to a societal standpoint. And I think as well, you know, companies have an obligation to configure a menu of resources, of benefits, of programs, key capabilities, and capacity to ensure that the needs of our people are met. And when I think about you know, the AAPI population, I mean, so much of what you've heard from Lisa and April resonate with me. So I was born in Vietnam. We came over, were sponsored to the US as refugees, and also grew up in a very traditional Confucian household. And as the younger of two children, where my brother is the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son, I mean, growing up, there were, you know, we'll call it different expectations. As of course, my parents love us equally and show it every day. But I remember for me, from the earliest part of my career after I finished residency, and I smiled, Lisa, when you talked about traditional paths. I mean, I'm a physician by education and training, so that's as traditional in the API community as you can get. However, I took a non-traditional career path. After finishing residency in Boston, very quickly I decided I wanted to straddle the clinical world of healthcare and the business world of healthcare. And I remember I was telling my mom I was gonna also become a consultant. I was gonna work in due diligence for a boutique investment bank in addition to practice. And I just had my first baby, daughter. She looked at me aghast, and all she could say is, how are you gonna take care of your daughter? There was nothing about how will your spouse also contribute. And even today, many years into my career, when I speak with my parents, it's never, well, tell me all the wonderful, interesting things going on in your multinational environment. It's always, are you cooking from scratch? Are the meals on the table? Did you make breakfast? And my husband often jokes, and for a variety of reasons, he's actually lost a bit of weight. He's had a bit of viral syndrome and hasn't been eating. He's like, I'm gonna call your mother and tell her I lost 5 pounds because she's gonna call you and be like, gasp, right? And so the whole point of that anecdote is there are certain sandwich generation expectations around family and taking care of family, be it kids, parents, or grandparents. And many of us, you know, many generations in one household, and employers have an obligation to think about what are those resources from a caregiving standpoint. And then also, you know, with respect to just the day-to-day, raising awareness. Whether it's events and celebration of events around key cultural holidays for AAPIs and, you know, and other identities as well. But those celebrations, those little cues and clues in the workplace every day around awareness, cultural sensitivity, role modeling, enabling, supporting across the end-to-end spectrum of life and work needs is really, really important.
April, Lisa, do you want to add anything else? Or?
Generally about how we can
open up as a community, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think vulnerability is key. You know, when we roll out Spring Health to employers, by far the biggest predictor of our program success and the engagement with Spring Health and with our services is whether the executive team or someone from the executive team announces it and endorses it. And, you know, bonus points for telling a personal connection to mental health. That by far has the biggest influence and impact on whether people sign up and make use of our services. So I like to tell our customers, you know, find the executive sponsor who's going to be vulnerable and talk about why mental health is important for the company, for them, and you know, let's launch it that way. And I embody that in my own leadership as well. I think it's really important to have visible, you know, Asian American leaders, but also Asian American leaders who can be vulnerable about the struggle around our mental health journeys or the mental health journeys of our loved ones.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is I think as leaders in organizations, we have to model the behavior that we want others to share. And I think this notion of being vulnerable, being transparent, being willing to talk about it, and being willing to say, you know, I'm not okay today, as a leader in organizations is incredibly powerful. My personal story is that my mother, who's 82 years old, had breast cancer during COVID. And so we were all stuck at home. She was going through surgery, through chemotherapy. I have 3 kids. I was working remotely, had just joined Coca-Cola, was dealing with her breast cancer situation, taking care of my 87-year-old dad. And I remember just feeling completely overwhelmed with everything that was going on, and counter to sort of the upbringing that I had in terms of being, you know, just buckling it up and feeling like I had everything in control and nope, it's all good, and putting on the big shiny face. You know, I realized that the only way I could get the help I needed for myself and from my team was to be vulnerable and to say to them, you know what, I'm actually not okay right now. I've got a lot of things going on. I really need help. I need you all to kind of fill in some gaps that I'm not able to do right now. I talked to my siblings and I said, look, I need help with this. I talked to my spouse and I said, you got to handle the stuff with the kids because I've got these things going on with mom and dad. And it's a bit liberating to be able to say that, but I will say that the self-talk that I had to manage in my own head of, I'm a disappointment, I'm a failure, I can't believe I can't do all this. I mean, I'm smart, I should be able to figure this out, just try to keep the, you know, cheeriness going is, it's very hard. And I think it goes to your point that a lot of people struggle with this and they're not willing to articulate it. They're not willing to share it. They're not willing to be vulnerable to people for fear of judgment, as well as for fear of disappointment. And I think we as a community need to support each other in recognizing that, hey, guess what? We're human. And even Asians are human. And we're not perfect, contrary to what others may think. And so I think it's okay. And lowering the standard and expectations for yourself is the first place to start.
Yep. And I think
just one other quick point to round this out. I think one other thing as well that's really important that businesses need to do is to demonstrate through actions that these case studies, if you will, these precedents, that actually when people speak up about their own struggles, and they can be very significant struggles, it doesn't hold you back with respect to career progression. And so those promotion decisions where that perfect human being is actually not the prototype for the people who progress in their careers into the C-suite, I think is really, really important. And building that trust that businesses really, really mean it. It's okay not to be okay. Right. You'll still get ahead in your career.
Exactly. There's strength in vulnerability, as you all said.
You know, we're the silent model minority, right? And so people expect us not really to say anything or complain. And so I think it's actually very hard and difficult for Asian American executives to open up and be real. I think when all the violence against Asians was happening in the peak of COVID, the Asian Americans at Spring Health and all over the world obviously were hurting, and we had a healing circle, I think is what we called it. But we had a conversation with the Asian American community, and I went to the circle actually just to show my support, and I wasn't going to say anything, but but I was so struck by the stories that just kept popping up. And so I shared my own, and I talked about, growing up in a really white neighborhood as the only Asian kid, and being teased for my eyes or the smell of kimchi in my lunchbox, right? And those memories, I repressed and suppressed for so long, and in that moment, there were tears, and it was a really emotional moment of release for me too. And so I was very struck by how much I have been holding in, right, as part of this model minority, and recognize in that moment there are so many micro traumas that we have all gone through to get to these positions of power, and I think being vocal about our stories can make an incredible difference.
Especially as a leader, to bring back the point that I think you've all said, is that leadership matters a great deal, and in really making sure that we're opening things up, destigmatizing mental health. And I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight that this is something that the President and Vice President care deeply about and have done some really remarkable work on over the last couple of years. You've heard our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, talk about this too. So I'm glad you're all doing it in your workplaces too. To wrap things up, we've been talking about you as leaders, as bamboo ceiling breakers, as incredible, thoughtful providers of mental health services and making sure your workplaces are inclusive, affirming. What do you do for yourselves? Like, how do you check in with yourselves? What tactics do you have to make sure that you're good? We were talking backstage, we're all working parents, you're all working moms. So what are the ways in which you ensure that you're okay?
I can start.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I go to therapy. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone here should go to therapy. It's life-changing, and like so many of the little nuggets of self-realization around like having a Confucian identity and really struggling to interact with older folks or whatever, like those are the nuggets that I actually got through therapy. And there are so many limiting beliefs, like the whole Confucian thing. My dad was like, that's ridiculous, and it is a limiting belief, but therapy is an opportunity for you to expose those limiting beliefs and conquer them. And so when it comes to self-care, and the best thing that I can do in the face of these challenges that we face as a minority, the best thing that I can do is go to therapy.
For me, it's maybe a couple of dimensions. First is the social connection and just staying in touch with family and my friends. There's a trusted circle of people who've seen me through life and work and the ups and the downs, which there have been plenty of both, I will say. And whenever I'm not well, or even when I am well, just staying in close touch is really, really important, working things out with this trusted network. And then the second piece of it is focusing on things that give me joy. There are a lot of things that give me joy, whether it's travel, whether it's just sometimes hanging out watching whatever series it is I can get engrossed in. I'm a bit of a true crime aficionado, so there's plenty of content there these days. And then, of course, all the habits around, especially for me, exercise is key. It's honestly the best mental health antidote I have, no matter how badly I feel. If I just get outside, especially if the sun is shining and the weather is beautiful as it is now, exercising is critical. And then the last piece of it is sleep. I think through the years, especially during residency, I was a bit conditioned to going sometimes actually a couple days without sleep, and not without realizing the impact on my mental health and well-being. And so if just lining those sort of brilliant essentials up and making sure I pay this off, it goes a long way to self-regulation, managing the negative self-talk, maintaining that sense of self. And sometimes where necessary, a good pair of figurative earplugs goes a long way as well.
Mm-hmm. Lisa?
Ditto on a lot of the things that April and Diana said, but I would say the first and most important thing that I do for self-care is give myself permission. Mm-hmm. And it's permission to be tired, it's permission not to do the dishes, it's permission to check that email tomorrow and to focus on myself, it's permission to let go of the guilt that I feel when I do that. And sometimes it's just permission to do nothing and focus on myself. I am a master spar, so I can kill a spa like nobody else. I like to read, exercise, and I think community is extremely important. So the biggest thing I give myself permission to do is to connect with people that give me nourishment. So it's the community of my friends and family, it's community of colleagues that bring me great joy and comfort in the things that I'm going through. And that just a lunch or a dinner or a phone call with someone that understands what I'm going through is worth so much more. And so that's how I prioritize it.
That sounds right. I just want to say thank you to all of you for your leadership, your thoughtfulness on this panel. You've heard about sponsorship and mentorship, about manifesting, right, your worth, about leadership, and really importantly, and asking for help when you need it. And all of us do need to ask for help sometimes. So thank you all. Please give them a round of applause.